Merci beaucoup, Teresa.
Thank you very much, Teresa. As you will have all understood, today Europe has decided to make available the resources to decarbonize and reindustrialize at the same time, over 100 billion euros in total, and for good reason. At a time when some would seek to impose their model on us, the best response is to bolster our own European model. Decarbonising our industry is not just a question of environmental importance, as I've already said in this room during the press conference with the Commission President when we presented the competitiveness compass. It's also a strategy for competitiveness and a security imperative. All sectors, all of the industries collected around the strategy, be it steel, automobile, these are all important and necessary industries at a time of political and economic tension. Linking industrialisation and decarbonisation is choosing for a model to bolster European competitiveness, create jobs and ensure that all Europeans across Europe have a prosperous future. That's the goal of this deal for clean industry, which we three are presenting today. And this is a commitment also to industrial production made in Europe that is sustainable and competitive. There are huge expectations. This is confirmed every time I go visit an industrial site, or the colleagues do so, as we have been doing week in, week out since we took up our posts. In a word, we have to produce more, better, and producing better means producing in a decarbonised and European way. The clean industry deal is, in a way, a business model for low-carbon industry in Europe. And today, I'm here to present the main lines: demand, costs, financing, and inputs. Let's start with demand. To sum things up, this week, as in previous weeks, I've heard once again the same thing from employers and employees who I meet out in Europe. They say that they've made efforts to decarbonise their industry, but there's not enough demand coming through for clean steel or clean cement. Our priority, therefore, is to increase demand in the low-carbon sector in Europe, and to that end we have to stimulate demand. This deal, therefore, proposes to totally rethink the logic behind public procurement, which until now has been based solely on the cost criteria. We're going to be adding new criteria of sustainability, resilience, performance and European preference in public contracts and more generally in public assistance. We'll also be taking a look at the private sector, such as company car fleets. More will follow on that in a few days. Number two, costs. Our industrial sites are almost all facing the same problem, and that's energy costs, which are far too high. Teresa mentioned this a moment ago. We all know the reason behind this. The European electricity market is too volatile, which contributes to increasing the final bill. That means that we have to enable the most energy-intensive industries to sidestep that volatility, which is why we are going to bolster long-term energy contracts. As Teresa mentioned a moment ago, that will be done in part with a pilot project with the European Investment Bank, which for the first time ever will be able to guarantee energy contracts. This will completely change the game for a number of industries. In this way, we hope to increase the production of clean energy in Europe, decouple electricity prices from gas prices when it comes to long-term contracts, and we hope to promote energy security in Europe. The third line of the business plan is financing. It's a simple idea. We have to provide financial support to the industrial sectors who make the leap and play by the rules to decarbonise our economy. And we're doing that jointly, the European institutions, member states, public bodies and the private sector. Because the fact is, to electrify a steelworks, for example, all of these stakeholders have to be involved. We have to work, all of the stakeholders have to work together. We'll be bringing 3 sources of financing to the table: European funds, the mobilization of private funds, and state aid, as Teresa mentioned. Perhaps just one word in particular when it comes to European funds. I imagine we'll be coming back to the Innovation Fund, but we also plan to mobilize Invest EU. That guarantee will make it possible to raise more private financing. Thanks to good measures of simplification, we'll also be able today to show the impact with 50 billion euros, 25 billion of which can be mobilized directly in decarbonisation and our decarbonisation strategy. The fourth part of the business plan, finally, is input. The inputs. I'd start with just one central element of any industrial equation, and that's the purchase of raw materials. Here we have 2 goals: to decrease the costs for raw materials and to limit expenditure. We have to be clear. To that end, we're going to have to be far more strategic in our purchasing policy and in our production of raw materials here in Europe. That means, firstly, we have to secure our own extraction and the exploitation of our own rare earths. Europe's land has a number of resources which aren't being tapped. Our services are in the process of finalizing a list of several dozen projects to make use of raw materials around Europe. These include extraction projects, but also production, recycling projects, and projects to establish strategic stockpiles here in Europe. That means that it's an overarching global strategy for raw materials. As I mentioned, recycling is also going to be important. The Clean Industry deal includes a recyclability section, particularly when it comes to raw materials, where we have to ensure circularity. As you may know, we don't properly make use of the secondary market as things stand, and we have to change that so that waste materials can be used properly to access more essential raw materials here in Europe, keep them here, recycle them here, reuse them here. As I've said here before, it's just not acceptable that we in Europe export the black mass of batteries elsewhere, which are then bought back by Europeans once they've been reconditioned outside Europe, and all of that at a huge cost, importing those input costs back into European industry. We therefore intend to propose a system which will make it possible for the entire cycle to take place here. There will be announcements coming. In March, we'll be proposing a number of projects as well as a strategy which will split down into different documents and text. Finally, we propose to create a joint purchasing platform for raw materials. That way we can jointly decide from whom to buy, how and at what price. We have to do that with lithium, cobalt. This is similar to what we did with the COVID vaccines a few years ago. It's a joint procurement strategy. It will be voluntary, but it will be made available to member states and will provide them with a powerful European tool to bring down the price of raw materials and ensure that we buy at the right time, also allowing us to assess European consumption and production figures. And this brings me to my final point. As has already been mentioned, Europe is a player, not just a playing field. We have to use our trade defence tools more strategically by increasing and bolstering the rules that apply to foreign subsidies, of which our companies are the #1 victims. We have to include that we're not. And we also have to bring in new conditions on foreign investment here in Europe, particularly in things like intellectual property. One thing is clear, Europe has to become the #1 destination for clean technology investments. But all deals have to be win-win for both sides. And that's what we hope to achieve also with these proposals. This deal will apply across a number of sectors, and we'll soon see presentations on steel, the automobile sector, chemicals industry, sustainable transport, the bioeconomy, and others. The aeronautic sector is one which is going to be particularly key. I know that they are making efforts to decarbonise, with very interesting projects ongoing which must continue to receive support. Allow me just to say a couple of words on the two texts which will be presented a little later, the omnibus on simplification, for example, where Marie-Louise and Commissioner Dombrovskis will go into greater detail in a few moments. But just a couple of words on the European Union's economic doctrine, which is competitiveness. It's a battle which will be won in investment, in energy prices, in innovation, in European productivity. But we also have to think about the regulatory framework. We have a stable, predictable regulatory framework, a strong rule of law that guarantees the rights of workers and investors. And at a time and in a world where economic actors are increasingly subject to arbitrary reactions by certain political leaders, that is a key ace up our sleeve. Europe must remain an island of stability and law. At the same time, as things evolve, we also realise that we've created a number of additional, sometimes redundant obligations on companies in a silo without taking account of companies' needs. That may have muddled the message and the goals which we set ourselves. And with this simplification proposal, we are showing three things, if I could summarise. Number one, that Europe is a good continent for business and investment with clear rules, pragmatic rules that are well adapted to our needs. As you've seen, when it comes to technology, particularly clean technology, we've made a lot of investment and we need to go further, including on the international level. Number two, Europe knows how to reform itself. We don't have a chainsaw, okay, but we have competent people leading the charge. And Europe also knows how to simplify without abandoning its goals. This omnibus does not throw into doubt the 2050 goal, the decarbonisation goal. On the contrary, it will simplify things, simplify finance and the rules to ensure that things are done well and efficiently. The reform of InvestEU, as I said, will generate more than 50 billion euros of investment, and it will be leverage. And the reform of CBAM will be leverage, allowing us to focus on carbon products in particular. And these are also part of simplification. By the end of the spring, I intend to come forward with another omnibus to simplify the life of SMEs and UTEs, as well as a new strategy on the single market. Because there can be no greater simplification than enhancing our single market. Thank you very much. I know that was a little lengthy.
Et maintenant, Commissioner Hoekstra, you have the word, please.